wasn't supposed to be home that early, and that small mistake may have saved my life. Because if the meeting hadn't been canceled, and if I hadn't realized halfway to work that I'd forgotten my access badge, I would have spent the entire day believing my marriage was normal. But instead I turned the car around, slightly annoyed at myself, and pulled into the driveway, expecting silence and routine, and nothing unusual. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I heard my wife's voice from the living room, low-controlled, almost affectionate, and she wasn't alone. "No, he hasn't questioned anything," she said softly, and something in my chest tightened, because that tone wasn't meant for me. It was meant for someone she trusted. "He actually apologized this morning," she continued, and a man's voice answered through speakerphone, calm and precise. "Good, consistency is important. You can't rush cognitive doubt." Cognitive doubt? The words echoed in my head as I stood frozen in the hallway, trying to understand what I was hearing. "I replaced the documents last week," she said smoothly. "He signed them without reading closely." My heartbeat slowed instead of racing, and that scared me more than panic would have, because it meant I was processing, not reacting. And when the man asked about the evaluation, she replied, "Dr. Keller already noted mild confusion during the last visit. The second assessment will make it official." Official? What, oversight, guardianship, control? I stepped backward carefully, before the floor could creak, and slipped outside without letting them know I had been there. The sunlight felt too bright, too ordinary, compared to the conversation I had just overheard, and I sat in my car staring at the steering wheel, realizing the past 2 months suddenly made sense. The missing mail, the changed passwords, the way she kept asking if I felt tired lately. Always gentle, always concerned. My phone buzzed and her name lit up the screen. "Did you reach the office safely?" I looked at the message, knowing she was still inside the house 10 feet away, texting me as if the lie required no effort. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not heartbreak. Calculation. Because if she believed I was unaware, she would continue. And if she continued, she would expose more. So I typed back, "Yes." Traffic cleared faster than expected, and started the engine, slowly pulling away as if nothing had happened. While my mind replayed every detail, small transfers in our account labeled consulting adjustments, the way she answered questions for me at the doctor's office, the subtle narrative forming that I was stressed, distracted, confused. She wasn't trying to hurt me physically. She was trying to erase me legally, and that plan was far more dangerous, because it would make her look like the caring wife, and me like the unstable husband. And as I drove toward downtown, one realization settled cold and clear. The next morning I acted different on purpose, slower movements, longer pauses. I left my phone in the kitchen and pretended to look for it, while she watched quietly, not worried, just observing. "You've been distracted lately," she said gently, and I nodded like it embarrassed me, because that's what she wanted, weakness, confirmation. I took the coffee she handed me but barely sipped it, watching her reflection in the microwave door, as she tracked every movement. Later at work, I checked our joint accounts carefully, not emotionally but logically. And that's when I saw it. Small transfers labeled consulting fees, cognitive review, administrative processing, nothing large enough to alarm anyone but consistent, structured, planned. This wasn't random spending. This was positioning money somewhere safe, somewhere controlled. And suddenly the word oversight from last night echoed in my head. She wasn't planning to leave me, she was planning to control me. That evening she mentioned another doctor's appointment, saying the last evaluation showed mild confusion, and she said it softly, sympathetically, like she was helping me accept something about myself. I let silence stretch before answering, slowly, as if trying to remember, and I saw it, relief in her eyes. She believed the story was working. That night I pretended to fall asleep early, and exactly 9 minutes later, she slipped out of bed whispering into her phone, "He's getting worse, he didn't question anything today." My chest tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. She thought she was ahead, she thought I was fading. But what she didn't know was that every transfer, every document, every whispered call was now being logged, copied, saved, because she was building a narrative and I was building evidence. And the difference between those two things would decide who lost everything in the end. I didn't confront her, because confrontation would only warn her. Instead, I booked an appointment with an attorney she trusted, Marcus Hale, the same man who handled our house purchase and estate planning years ago. When I placed the financial statements and recorded timestamps in front of him, he didn't interrupt. He read every line carefully, then looked up at me with something colder than surprise, understanding. "She's building a capacity case," he said calmly. "If she proves cognitive decline, she gains legal control." Control, not partnership, not divorce, control. I felt the weight of that word settle in my chest as he explained how subtle documentation, repeated claims, and cooperative medical notes could create a legal narrative, strong enough to question my decision-making ability. But then he said something that shifted everything. "Do not confront her yet." Yet meant strategy. We began moving quietly, individual accounts separated, beneficiary structures updated, emergency authority clauses revised. Assets I inherited were transferred into protected trusts, beyond spousal access. Everything done legally, silently, irreversibly. Meanwhile, at home, I continued playing my role. Slower speech, slight hesitation, occasional misplaced items. And every time I did, I saw reassurance flicker in her eyes. She believed her timeline was intact. She believed I was declining naturally. And that belief made her comfortable. And comfort makes people careless. 3 nights later, she stood beside me holding my coffee, watching closely as I lifted the mug. "You seem weaker," she whispered softly, her hand resting against my chest, feeling my heartbeat, measuring progress. And for the first time, I realized something chilling. She wasn't hoping I would recover. She was waiting for confirmation. But what she didn't know was that while she monitored my heartbeat, I had already secured everything she thought she would inherit. And the power she believed was slowly transferring to her had already slipped permanently out of reach. I decided to stop reacting and start watching more closely. Because strategy without proof is just paranoia, and I needed something undeniable. So 2 days later, when she said she had a wellness consultation across town, I followed at a distance, not close enough to alarm her, but near enough to see where she went. She didn't enter a clinic. She walked into a quiet office building downtown, and 15 minutes later, a man joined her. Not young, not charming, not reckless. He looked professional, composed, like someone who builds plans instead of taking risks. I stayed in my car recording from across the street as they sat near the window, their body language calm, familiar, transactional. At one point, she slid a folder across the table, and he nodded slowly, then leaned closer, speaking with quiet certainty. And even without hearing every word, I understood the dynamic. This wasn't romance, this was partnership. When she left, he remained seated, reviewing the papers carefully. And that's when my phone vibrated. A notification from our joint account. Another transfer, larger this time, labeled strategic advisory, and suddenly the pattern sharpened. She wasn't just preparing medical documentation, she was restructuring ownership, and he was the architect. That night, when she asked gently how I was feeling, I answered slower than usual, watching her eyes study me like an investment nearing maturity. But what she didn't realize was that Marcus had already traced the advisory account. It wasn't solely in her name. It was controlled through a layered holding structure. And the primary authority didn't belong to her. It belonged to him. She thought she was building independence, but she was positioning herself beneath someone far more experienced. And for the first time, I saw the full picture. She wasn't just betraying me. She was being used. And she had no idea that the man she trusted most was quietly positioning himself to take everything from both of us. The next morning, I let her make coffee, pretending to be distracted as usual, while my mind replayed every move from the last few days. I took the mug slowly, watching her reaction. She smiled, confident, certain, believing she had control. And I let her think that, because her overconfidence would be her downfall. I placed the folder on the counter quietly. Audio recordings, bank statements, timestamp documents. Marcus had already analyzed everything, and now the final evidence was in front of her. She froze, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face that I had never seen before. "What's this?" she whispered softly. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, just long enough to feel her panic rise before I spoke calmly. "The truth. Everything you've done, recorded. Every manipulation." She looked from the folder to me, searching for a reaction, and found none, because I was in control for the first time in months. I was steady, deliberate. While she realized the timeline she had built in her mind, the plan she thought was foolproof was completely exposed. Marcus stepped in and explained the holding account structure. The advisory transfers, the hidden legal protections that made her moves irrelevant. She tried to calculate a way out. Subtle words, soft reassurances, but the legal trap was airtight. She understood that her partner had never been loyal. Her plan had been transparent to me all along, and there was nothing left to manipulate. I stepped closer and said quietly, "You thought you were winning." But I was watching every move. Her face paled, eyes wide, and for the first time since this started, she wasn't in control. She wasn't measuring me or calculating my weakness. She was just realizing how completely she had lost everything. I walked toward the door with my keys in hand and paused just long enough to let her see me steady, calm, untouched by her schemes. And as I opened the door and left the room, she didn't follow. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Because for the first time she knew she was powerless, and I was free.